Joining us now is Peter Andersen, Chief Investment Officer, founder, Andersen Capital Management. Very good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us today, Peter. I'm just wondering, what do you make of the recent gyrations, the choppiness we've seen in technology when there's been so many conversations around, whether we're seeing a bit of a changing of the guard here, as far as leadership with what we're seeing with the TPUs versus the GPUs. Now we're seeing obviously a mixed performance today with Google versus NVDA, as we've seen in previous sessions. How are you pulling it all together?
Well, I think it's long overdue. Just for background, I was one of the original holders of NVIDIA stock way back in 2015, and I held it all the way through its different modifications of what it actually catered to in businesses. If you remember, back then, it was a gaming chip. I don't think NVIDIA ever had fantasized that in 10 years it would go from a gaming champion to the figurehead of artificial intelligence, but yet here we find ourselves, okay? And the problem with this is we've gotten so excited about artificial intelligence that it's only natural to have a pullback and say, well, wait a minute, are we drunk with enthusiasm at this point, or is the reality a little bit different? So it's just shaking out, in my opinion, the competition, where we're headed. Do we have too much of an idealistic image of how this artificial intelligence is actually going to play out?
How do you think it's going to play out? Because as we mentioned at the top of the show, I mean, we've had some NVIDIA bulls coming out to sort of defending this name, the likes of Dan Ives calling it the Rocky of the AI revolution, and the TPU is not shaking, yes. Jensen. But then, of course, you've had some other commentary. I mean, Ben Emmons has been making the point that, maybe we're seeing a new circularity developing where NVIDIA had very much been part of that circle, but now maybe it's shifting to the Google Alphabets of the world. Do you see any of that, or, I mean, is this just noise?
Oh, I see much more than noise here. I sold all our NVIDIA shares way back in the summer, okay? And that was because I had been anticipating that some of this stuff would actually come into focus. So, for instance, the whole accounting accusations that are happening right now, that's just one tip of the criticism. I think there are several other points of the criticism beside the accounting questions, which any company could be vulnerable to. More specific with artificial intelligence and NVIDIA is whether or not that we actually are going to replicate human thought. Nobody's actually talked about the reality of that, but embedded in all this enthusiasm is this idealistic model that we are going to replace the human brain in many functions. And I just think that is so wrong, so far-fetched, but yet people are just moving on with that fantasy. And then, of course, the other aspect that people are starting to focus on now is the overbuilding. The enthusiasm for the data centers, and yet, are there any business plans? Who are actually going to use the data centers? So far, we haven't heard of anybody complaining that they can't get access to data centers right now. And lastly, if that were the case, a simple test like using ChatGPT would lock up. But ChatGPT is not locking up. That would be a symptom of so many users were trying to access it, but it didn't have the capability yet. So that's a mouthful of an answer, but that is truly what we think today.
Okay, I mean, you've been talking about how we're at an inflection point in AI, and if my memory serves me right, Peter, I mean, the last time we chatted, it was a sort of a bit of a preview of the earnings season that's just gone now, and you sort of raised the point that this could be the first of several earnings seasons where we would start to see the street questioning the ROI on all of this, and that certainly was the case. I mean, particularly off the back of the performance we saw in Meta post-earnings. What do you make of it now that we're on the other side of the earnings? And what do you think happens next?
Well, in a sense, I do feel vindicated because it's actually late arrival, in our opinion, because we were thinking of this so much earlier. So we are starting to see some cracks, and I think it's healthy. We need to start looking at this. The comparisons to the telecom bubble and the internet traffic, doubling every 10 days or whatever they were saying back then, there are some human nature similarities with that. I'll just leave it at that. We could debate that forever, but human nature is such that we like to think this is going to be the solution to all issues, and I just think that we might be getting caught up with that. So for the next earning seasons, I do expect more pressure, as there should be, questioning the aspect, the applicability of artificial intelligence, et cetera. And one last thing where I think is remarkable right now is, we didn't speak about this, but the so-called analyst memo that NVIDIA sent out to a select group of sell-side analysts skirting Reg FD, full disclosure, is remarkable, in my opinion. If it were good news, they would have told everyone. When a mega cap sends quiet reassurance memos only to analysts, that's not the behavior of a confident company. It's the behavior of one trying to get ahead of the narrative. So I think we are starting to see the initial cracks that we will get further as earnings evolve.
Look, that memo was certainly interesting in the context of what you were saying. I mean, particularly because it seemed to be trying to address some of Michael Burry's, I suppose, accusations around depreciation right now, which has caught a lot of attention and something that's now been a big part of the conversation, sort of bringing some of these hyperscalers into question. At the same time, I suppose the NVIDIA newsroom has been quite busy because they did actually post to X yesterday about how they're delighted with Google's success. They've made great advances in AI, and we continue to supply to Google at a time when there was a lot of questions around, how there was potentially going to be some competition here for NVIDIA with the TPUs and the GPUs. Can you sort of speak to some of that?
Yes, I think that there will be continued competition. NVIDIA has a stronghold on the market share right now. But trust me, there will be competitors entering, and we saw that a bit last year with a couple of competitors, but they really didn't get enough traction. I do think that there will be cheaper providers, and let's also assume somebody might break the code, so to speak, of how to manufacture AI cheaper, with simpler components. I'm predicting that that will happen too, and we won't need these very expensive components because there will be a whole new theology or process about how the human brain works, and that we can actually replicate that in a simpler way. That's a long way off, probably a couple of Nobel Prizes away, but I do think that competition is a healthy aspect to this, and so far we really haven't seen much.
All right, certainly something to watch, though. Peter Andersen, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Happy holidays to you, and we'll catch you again next time. Chief Investment Officer, founder, Andersen Capital Management.